What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. Today we have an absolutely fantastic guest, Jeff Booth. And if you've been around my channel at all for any length of time, you've heard me talk about his book, talk about the stuff that he's said on other interviews. And so I am very excited to have Jeff Booth on today, and we're going to have a great discussion about really deflation and why that is the key. The title of your book, The Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. So welcome, Jeff. Thank you for being on today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Absolutely. I want to say that, I read a lot, and very rarely do I come across books that I want to read twice. Yours was in the top 5 books that I read last year. So it's something that there's a lot of really great insights in it, and it's very readable as well. It's something that, I'm not afraid to recommend because you're not talking over anybody's head.
I really appreciate that. And a lot of people have said they read it 3, 4, or 5 times. When I wrote it, I knew I had to write it in a way that could simplify concepts. But honestly, when I wrote it, I realized two things. One, I'm going up against an entire financial system that has no clue what I'm talking about, and so I could be, I could be looking like a pariah. Or two, nobody reads the book, and two
Mhm.
people read it. But it was one of those things I felt like I must do. I had to do it. And so to hear your feedback is just, it feels fantastic. So appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point there with you going up kind of an entire financial industry that, for the most part, doesn't agree with you. It's especially important that you're coming at this from the standpoint of somebody like it's not like you're a hedge fund manager or you've been, running a portfolio. You're coming at this with your background of being in technology and starting and running very successful businesses. And now you're on the board of many businesses. So you've got a very different starting point than most people who talk about these issues.
Yeah, it just like you, I read a lot of books. I've read about 50 books a year for the last 30 years. And so I'm curious. And when something doesn't make sense, I want to look deeper into why it doesn't make sense. So it's a curious mind, and open to learning is really probably the number one thing that gives you an advantage of looking at things differently.
Well, let's dive in there. What are, in terms of your framework, I want to kind of cover an outline and then dive into each of the kind of specific points. And in general, from what I've heard, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this. It seems like your general message is that we have a system, a financial system, really, that is built on inflation. But the overarching theme of history, the overwhelming force of history is deflation, especially now because of where technology is. And those systems are at odds with each other. And the more we operate on the last, let's say 100 years of inflation, the more we destabilize society. And we have to deal with the root causes, not just the symptoms, if we want to be able to move forward. And there's a bright future at the end of the tunnel if we deal with this with the root causes.
Yeah, that's really well said. These two forces are colliding against each other. We didn't notice them colliding against each other because technology was moving slower or innovation was moving slower. And so, to offset that natural force of essentially economic gain by entrepreneurs wanting to deliver more to society back 40 years ago, it didn't move very fast.
Mhm.
So we didn't see the monetary easing as much as it needed to do to create an inflation rate, and we got used to it. And now technology is driving, it wants to drive that abundance to society at a rate we can't even comprehend. So
Okay.
it wants to do, and that force is and an inflationary monetary policy is colliding against that force, trying to push the prices up unnaturally against this.
And that's I think that word unnaturally is key here because for many of us, I mean all of us, we've never lived in a time where prices go down over time because of this, this financial system that artificially pushes prices up. But when you look back at history, that's not always been the case. The period of like 1870 to 1900 in the United States, prices fell by 1, 2, 3% every year, but in real terms GNP actually grew, consumption actually grew. So people were getting wealthier, even though nominal prices were dropping. And you touch on that in your book, that deflation basically just means more for less, right?
Yeah, so imagine an alien dropping down from the sky and don't they don't know the system we live in, and so you're fresh to a system, and technology allows you to get an improvement on your time, so less labor,
Mm-hmm.
more efficiency. It gives you more for less, and on an exponential scale, more and more for less every year.
Mm.
And imagine explaining to that person why you created a system that has to operate the other way. That get
Yeah,
you have to get less and less and more, and you have to be on a hamster wheel with prices rising every year.
right,
Imagine trying to defend that system,
right.
and now you can see the it's now I understand kind of to get through to the other side, because we've lived in this artificial environment for so long, and we price everything in that artificial environment. It is real to us. I understand how painful that is going to be to transition to the other side, but just go back to what I just said and try to explain that to somebody who doesn't know about the system you created. It's not physics that needs to create
Mm.
inflation. It's a monetary policy that we designed, um, to and where prices have to go up. Now, does that make any sense?
Right, right. Well, okay, so I have a question for you then about that monetary system that we've designed and how what we're facing right now is different than in the past. Because let's say you go back 200 years and you want, hot water for bathing, and you want, hot meals prepared for you, and you want somebody to drive you around, take you places, and, things like that. Let's say music in your home. You have to have a full-time staff, like you have to pay for many people to run your life for you. Versus today, you make $40,000 a year. You have a smartphone with a couple apps on it like DoorDash and Uber, and you've got an Amazon Echo for $50 that plays music in your home. Everybody has access to stuff that nobody had access to hundreds of years ago. Um, how is today different than back then, and what we've experienced so far, and maybe the rate of acceleration on some of these things?
So let's start at the highest level, because people it's so hard for people to grasp this concept, and that's why people read the book multiple times to be able to grasp it, because it
Mm-hmm.
rewires your brain into a different way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But because we measure everything out of the existing system, so we don't see what's happening. But so let's just kind of agree on some concepts. And deflation is where you get more for your money, right? So goods
Right.
and services go down in value. And inflation is the opposite. You get less for your money. Goods and services go up in price.
Mm-hmm.
So not good or bad. Good or bad for different people. Good or bad for different systems. Right? Debt is
Right.
if you have deflation, you can't pay back debt.
Mm-hmm.
The debt you have, so it's really bad for debt. And so if you have an entire economy built on debt, then that's a bad. You understand why you can't allow that to happen. But back to the simple concepts on deflation, so you get more for your money. um, and now let's go to the very top of the order. When something is abundant, truly abundant, it becomes free. And why is that true? Is because there's on abundance, you can't create an economic value around abundance.
Mm.
And it's why the air you're breathing right now is free,
Right.
and the air you breathe underwater is not free.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's very difficult to create, and
Right.
technology
Right.
and technology is creating that abundance everywhere. And as it's creating more of that abundance, look at how many photos you use today versus how
Mm-hmm.
many photos people used 20 years ago, when they cost a lot of money to develop film, and then you'd go to the photo processor and realize your whole roll of film was garbage, and you miss the moment.
Right.
Now it's free in the cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have billions of photos at your disposal, and there's no cost for it. And so you get an exponential move in abundance happen,
Right.
and a
Right.
fall in price. And it's hard to Kodak went out of business from not being able to see how their business could monetize differently, even though they invented the digital camera,
Right. Yeah.
right? So 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 starting with oxygen, and then coming down, and think about now, look at the apps that have your listeners look at the apps on their phones, and what they probably think is, oh, they're only on that because they're getting advertising dollars. That's not true. Once you create a calculator app on the phone, never have to create it again.
Hmm.
It's free. You don't buy calculators anymore. Same as whether you can. In 2013, a LiDAR device. There's an article that talks about LiDAR never making it into cars because the LiDAR device was $70,000.
Hmm.
It's a $5 bill of material on the newest iPhone. It's embedded into
Wow.
the technology. So that is deflation, and it gives us more and more for less. And new business models are emerging all the time to give us more for less that we're taking advantage of. And so that what that means, and it's moving everywhere, as we move from a physical world into a more digital world. It's not just in your phone anymore. It's moving into a base layer of everything.
Hmm.
So the rate of deflation and what should be happening and is not because of monetary easing is staggering, and it's getting worse and worse. So the printing of money is an offset to try to make things grow unnaturally against a natural force of technology wanting to give you more for less.
Hmm.
Just one more ad.
Yeah.
You know this from the book, and but it took. So we should see evidence of what I'm saying, and that's why why the book was written before COVID, but it predicted all of these things.
Hmm.
Um, we should see evidence over the last 20 years. If technology is moving exponentially this way, wanting to give us more for less, we should see exponentially more printing on the other side. Fair?
Right. Yeah.
To hold us in check at a
Right.
2% inflation rate or
Hmm.
what. And that's what you see. And you see over the last 20 years, to be able to pretend we have growth,
Hmm.
there's been $185 trillion of stimulus.
Right. Yeah. Which
And,
is
and
growing
and
exponentially over time. Yeah.
exactly, it has to, because most of the deflation is in front of us,
Hmm.
not behind us. That's just trying to keep up with. So the more and more instability that's been building in the system is a direct cause of the technology moving the other way, but it's just starting. Most of the deflation is in front of us,
Hmm.
which it means the printing presses are just start firing up just now.
So there's a lot to unpack there. In summary, things become cheap when they become abundant. And the way to, or the process by which things become abundant is technology moving in and causing those things to become abundant, just like we've seen happen with, like having a personal butler with Uber, or many other areas of life. And this is, you're saying this, most of this is in front of us because this moves at an exponential pace. And so we're starting to see where we're going to have things that are becoming free or close to it across society, which means that in order to just make things look stable from a nominal perspective, the printing has to match that exponentially.
Exactly. So and that printing is making the world more and more unstable, because it's dividing it's enriching some at the expense of others at a rate that is increasing with each print. Inflation, um, if you looked at inflation or deflation, inflation, the other side of the coin of inflation is wage deflation.
Mm,
It's one and the same,
right,
right? So
right.
I'm making my money worth less, and I'm making my wages worth less. So I'm giving people wage decreases.
Hmm.
And it's one and the same. And by
Yeah.
doing that, I'm inflating prices of hard assets like raw materials, like houses and everything else, are going up at the rate of inflation as people look for stores of value against currency devaluation,
Hmm.
and everybody else is getting their pocket picked.
Right.
So I find it a certain irony in. And by the way, changing an actor in the system won't change the system. No matter if it's
Mm.
Republican, Democrat, no matter who it is in the system will not change, because it's a structural problem.
Right.
So imagine saying, okay, I've created a whole bunch of wealth inequality because everybody who owns assets, the people who own assets, who own stocks, who own houses and everything else, they're getting a gift through
Mhm.
inflation. Those prices are going up, and the
Yeah.
people who don't own them are getting their pocket picked because their income is going down in relation to that.
Right.
So, and it gets worse and worse. So now imagine in this world, this Frankenstein monster that we've created. Now, I hold prices unnaturally high on one side. Let's use commercial real estate as an example.
Hmm.
Commercial real estate should not be priced anywhere near where it is right now in the height of COVID,
Right.
and it's higher.
Hmm.
So that seems like an outlier, but it's not an outlier. So it stocks, everything else follow that same model. So I hold prices high unnaturally by printing money.
Hmm.
And then a whole bunch of people can't pay for those prices because their rents go up higher and everything else because it has to offset how much the new price is worth.
Hmm.
And now I need to give them money that I don't have to be able to pay for the prices I unnaturally held high.
Right.
And the whole thing keeps on reinforcing. So you get divide of society and further and further divide of society by where we are here
Hmm.
on this on the scale.
Which explains a lot of the division that we've seen develop over the last 10, 20 years. And ultimately what you explain in the book as well is that this is one of the main causes, if not the underlying source of really the fall or the collapse of societies, because the wealth inequality steepens to such an extent that it just topples with because of something like revolution or war or something like that.
Exactly. That's where it goes. If you keep doing this, that's where it goes. But then if you go to the other side of the coin, how do they stop now?
Right.
So let's just imagine you're Powell and you or you're Biden. What do you do?
Right.
And I'm really being serious here because then you see the folly of the existing system,
Hmm.
and I have some proposals or some thoughts on this, but what do you do in the existing system that could change the system?
Hmm.
So today there's over 130 trillion dollars of negative real interest bonds. So in other
Wow.
words, the risk-free rate, 130 trillion, and every other economic calculation, houses, stocks, everything else are built on top of that
Hmm.
essentially risk-free rate.
Right.
So the safest place I can store my money, what you would think would be the place where it's risk-free, and I would make the lowest return,
Hmm.
right? And then that would be the pegging for all other calculations. So now you have negative real interest rates in that whole stack.
Hmm.
So on my best day, if I hold this bond, I lose money.
Right.
On my best day,
Right.
I hold this bond to maturity, I lose money. But I know that governments, it's never going to be a best day. It's going to get worse.
Hmm.
And what you're seeing is a lot of this money is sitting here realizing that it has ultimate risk. It isn't risk free. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And that's actually what's driving Bitcoin adoption as well. Because as people start to see, wait, Bitcoin might actually have, in my opinion, it has way less risk than this. But if that's the risk-free rate, where do I go to be able
Right.
to? And then as money leaves that system into a new system that competes against that system, what would you do as a government?
Right.
Because interest rates have to go up to be able. You see the 10-year bond
Yeah.
you're going through the roof right now.
Hmm.
It has to go way higher. So do all the, and if it goes way higher to keep money in the system, then the entire economy collapses. But there's nothing backing the entire economy. It's just a bunch of counterparty risk. It's just debt all the way down to the sand. That
Yeah.
130 trillion. There's no gold back. There's nothing backing it. It's
Right.
just because I say it's good.
Right. Yeah.
and and now as money leaves that system into a new system and interest rates go up, there has to be a response to be able to buy it all, to print
Right.
way more.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no at this point with the size of how big this problem has gotten, like you're saying, if you're in a position of leadership, what is the option? It reminds me of the Forgotten Depression is a book by Jim Grant about the 1921 Depression, and it was called the Great Depression until 1929, 1930. But during that time when the collapse started, the Federal Reserve tightened. They raised interest rates. The government balanced their budget, and this is something Austrian economists, especially, I don't think they focus on enough, is the pain that happens when you take like the correct response. There was the short-term pain that happened was far more severe than what happened in the Great Depression. It just lasted a very short amount of time and kind of resolved itself. Now we're at this point, there's probably a really good argument to say we're past that point. If they decided, hey, we're going to take away the punch bowl, we're going to stop printing, we won't monetize any more of the government's debt, government has to, austerity, balance the budget, all that. The collapse, the economic pain would probably be just unthinkable
globally, because there's
Yeah.
nothing backing the system. So in 2008, in my company at that time, we had we saw the firsthand effects of what was going to be TARP before TARP.
Okay.
And what ended up happening is we had fully funded LCs that wouldn't be accepted by counterparty banks in other countries. So trade broke down.
Yeah.
It stopped for 3 days. Nobody would accept, and you're going, wait, the money's there. It's fully funded,
Yeah.
and nobody cared because they didn't trust the banking institution that where the money was there, because it's not money. It's just it's just a belief in money. It's a belief. It's a ledger entry. And so once that belief is broken, it just keeps unwinding. And so you'd see this system that requires a technology, it requires a currency that allows for deflation. That is unequivocal. We have to have that for society to thrive. But the existing system, it would reset the entire system, because you'd see the emperor has no clothes, and it would just keep, and that counterparty risk would keep coming down all the way to the ground. So that is the problem right now on the transition between systems.
So in this transition between systems, we can look at it and we can say, why can't we just continue repeating what we're doing right now? Every time there's a panic or a collapse or recession, depression, some sort of crisis, why can't we just print more? Is it inevitable that we transition to a deflationary system?
So let's go through the logic of what you just said. So remember in 2008 and the outrage at $250 billion.
Right.
Outrage.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a saving the system, and then it required more. And it required ever more. And now we're into trillions and trillions, and pretty soon we'll be into tens of trillions. And people start asking, and so could you keep doing that if you were one country and your citizens allowed you to do that forever? Maybe. Because your citizens would have to say, they would have to agree, okay, I'm going to do this. Effectively, government, there is no free market. Government controls who gets what, and I'm going to just let government do that. Because that's what that is, right? I print I effectively, it's distributing it to the top people. But then government could say, no, I'm going to create an economy over here. I'm going to give the bottom people this type of money. That always leads you away from the free market. That always leads into control by the biggest thug. Right. Throughout history. Yeah. Always. And managed economies, if you widen your time band, not with what you think is happening in China right now, but if you widen your time band out to history, managed economies never outperform free market economies. Right. Because there's no way a certain number of people could outthink everyone. Right. And so a free market economy, and if you buy that free market, so free market gives better living standards to everybody, because an economy, the taxes that you pay are as a result of a free market. So you realize that centrally planned economies like Russia can't really survive without controlling money and doing it and biggest thug. And so those are the two kind of ends of the spectrum, that and we're moving in right now. The world is moving into more central planning. Everyone. Right? With more money printing, you're removing the free market, and it's all central planning.
So, regarding central planning and why it fails, Stephen Wolfram recently, I don't know if you saw this a couple years ago, released his new theory of everything, and it's basically he's taking inputs with very simple inputs and running them, billions, trillions of times, and it's forming systems that he's comparing to the formation of the universe, laws of physics, things like that. And basically, you cannot get to the end model without actually running through everything. Even though you know the simple inputs, you can't predict what the future output will be in a closed, simple system. Whereas an economy is infinitely more complex. So, what hubris do we have to think a few people can take such a limited amount of information and outperform a decentralized or run in front of the entire economy doing what each individual actor thinks is best for itself? You're going to have misallocation of funds that eventually makes giant failures.
It's even yes, unequivocally yes. So right now, there wouldn't be a person around that could say that capital is not being misallocated right now. And if capital is being misallocated, then it's actually adding more deflationary pressure,
Hmm.
right? so
Yeah.
so
Right.
so you're actually all of this print is actually adding more and more. So it's harder and harder to get out. All the while, technology is advancing, advancing, advancing. So what would a business do in this environment? I can tell you, because what a business does is they try to deliver really good value, and they go broke unless they deliver you more value all the time,
Hmm.
because somebody else competes with them and provides more value. Today, that's being done by removing labor and changing business models to be able to deliver value differently. Um, and if we allowed that to happen, as the labor was removed, prices would fall in lockstep.
Right.
If we don't allow
Right.
that if we don't allow that to happen, it happens anyways.
Hmm.
And but prices are way up here, and when people lose their jobs, they rise up and burn down the system.
Hmm.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so, so, what would you do if you're a company right now? And actually, I can see this a little bit. You are either um, a ward of the state where you constantly require government bailouts,
Hmm.
or you're delivering value at a pace that's crazy, and you're reusing technology to do that. And you
Right.
and that technology is removing labor faster and faster. And we use all those companies. We
Yeah.
use Apple, we use Amazon, we use Google. And if you look at what they're doing, it's pretty obvious what happens. And they're printing money out of the same thing. But that's so the irony of the system that we live in, we're actually making those monopolies bigger as a byproduct.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially because of the failure that you're causing around the system by not allowing, kind of like a forest fire, by not allowing the small fires. You're creating like a winner take all system that eventually the whole forest burns down.
Yeah, and if you think about this in nature or systems, um, systems require an ebb and flow,
Yeah.
right? Um, a a a recession or a depression is just a natural ebb and flow to a system, and stopping that from happening by concentrating more power in government stops the flow, stops the ebb and flow. But it also and as a byproduct concentrates control in a certain number of people choosing everything else, and changes. And so that's where we are today in the system, by stopping a natural thing 20 years ago, 30 years ago, by thinking that you could artificially grow, take interest rates down and artificially grow against what's happening with technology, and then increasing, lowering them again, lowering them again, lowering them again, then monetary easing and everything else. That's you've you've said it. Okay, our system will never fail.
Yeah.
Is that um on what on what reasonable hypothesis does it make sense that on a finite planet you could grow forever?
Right. Right. Yeah, with finite resources, even population, which demographics is a huge driver of growth, population as technology increases, healthcare increases, looks like it'll probably top out somewhere 10, 11,
Yep.
12 billion. Um,
Yep.
and so even with that, there's finite everything that we're looking at. And so you can't just extrapolate into the future and say, it's there's going to be infinite growth.
Yeah, and think through that, and by infinite growth, information will keep growing.
Hmm.
But that information, think about what, I've used this example a couple times, but um, think about that desk you have
Hmm.
in front and in front of you. That is an idea in somebody's head,
Hmm.
so it's information.
Right.
And that information is put into a prototype, and then somebody said, do you think somebody would buy this? And they have a whole bunch of marketing, so a whole bunch of jobs, everything else, and then it's sent over to China to produce a desk, or first probably one, ship it over, does this work? Yep, now I'm going to scale up production, and I'm going to tons of those desks, and I'm going to ship them over in containers, and then I'm going to land at a port, ship to a distribution facility, ship to a retail store, which and drive marketing to come in to say, hey, my desk is better than your desk here, why don't you, here's the price of my desk,
Right.
all the cost, all of the jobs. Pretty soon, within the next 10 years, that piece of information in your head is going to move digitally and going to be able to be printed at your home
Yeah.
without any of that infrastructure.
Right.
It's just information.
Right.
And it's in that information, and then after that's happens, then, or at the same time as that's happening, because you'll think at first my information is better than someone else's information, AI will be on top of that information, giving
Yeah.
you a whole bunch of different things that you could never imagine how much you would like them,
Hmm.
for no cost.
Yeah.
And so that is the world we're moving into, and most of the deflation is in front of us. If you look at energy, if you looked at energy, why energy prices are lower right now is new energy sources are coming on lower and lower every year with solar. And now that's additive to the entire energy grid. It's nowhere near taking over the entire grid, but
Right.
it's additive to energy at a lower price,
Hmm.
and then lower and lower every year as we transition.
Right.
That is without an innovation in something else
Yeah.
that that is a total change. But if you just took solar on that axis and realize how much lower it's going to be over time, and solar became more of the energy grid, it's at, it's way more. It's adding deflation to what we already have at a rate that's pretty insane, and it's energy is the number one input of everything else.
Right. Right.
So now tell me, in that equation, how it is possible that, so when people talk about Bitcoin consuming energy, I kind of get a laugh out of that,
Yeah.
because nobody's measuring the cost of a system that requires you to grow forever and keep on growing forever and ever against kind of the natural laws.
Hmm.
So so it's an order of magnitude bigger problem in a system. In other words, the innovation that you're bringing lower price to market has to be offset with more printing to stop that innovation from mattering
Right.
in our current world.
Right. Well, that's a fantastic transition to the technology side of things. And you mentioned that people tend to underestimate the impact of technology in the short term, um, or overestimate it in the short term, but then underestimate it in the long term. And I think 3D printing, which you brought up, is a fantastic example of this, because when it first came onto the scene, everybody was talking about, hey, this is a game changer, this is going to change the world. And then 1 year, 2 years fizzled out and everybody thinks it's dead. And that's probably one of those things that, like you said, 5, 10 years from now, people are going to look back at it and say, I can't believe we didn't see how big this was going to be.
Where did this come from?
Right.
And timing those, typically what ends up happening in technology is people think narrowly about a technology
Hmm.
without seeing, and I'm talking about now creating economic value from that technology. They
Right.
think about narrowly, use AI for example.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to create an AI company. you don't create an AI company. You combine AI with a different thing, an orthogonal thing that the timing hits, and Google emerges
Yeah.
or Amazon emerges out of that use. But so it's not the technology per se. It's what, as these things come together. And actually, if you're an entrepreneur and you miss the timing of these things coming together, you create a digital printing something that then shows up in everybody's brains as, oh, digital printing is going to be this revolution, and in their brain is locked into, it takes 24 hours to print a knick-knack.
Hmm.
And they tune it out because it's useless,
Hmm.
all without realizing that the technology underpinning it is still doubling, and it's still moving faster and faster and faster, and at some point then innovation comes out the other side. In fact, look at the Palm Pilot
Yeah.
versus the iPhone.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of these trends hitting a point that all of a sudden this stuff could come together at the right time.
Right. Right. And AI is a big part of that you talk about a lot because of the judgment that's necessary to sift through all of the data to make some of these things abundant. Like you're
Yeah.
talking about this desk, putting things like this in front of people is currently going to be, it's going to be far outdone in a much more efficient manner to get actual goods delivered to people in a far cheaper manner using AI.
And it's not just goods. That's why I talk about AI as being a horizontal technology, a general purpose technology, that touches everything. And from the book, but one of the things, and I talked to one of the foremost economics researchers, plus actually commented on the book,
Mhm.
and he pushed me, and he said, why is this time different than before? And I said, number one, in past transitions, we didn't have technology like artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
right? We didn't have, you could say we had electricity, which produced a similar transition in 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 deflationary force, and new industries were built on top of it.
Right.
But the electrification, or electricity, was a horizontal technology that didn't get better every year.
Right.
It also, nobody I can remember thinking electricity is going to be smarter than humans one day,
Right.
right? And so if you carry that forward, and it doesn't actually matter if artificial general intelligence comes in 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, 2 years, the point of it is it will come.
Right.
And the entire way along it coming, it will remove more and more labor because it'll do
Yeah.
things better. And so that'll be additive. So it's not like a light switch, and everybody's thinking about the light switch moment
Right.
instead of the trend. And the trend has been there all along, and you can see the trend really clearly. And if you're anywhere close to this, how fast this is moving, which I am, the trend is way faster than people believe.
Hmm.
Um, and then it forced me to recognize, um, and I said it in the book too. What, how do we learn versus AI?
Hmm.
Um, and human intelligence, I believe, is just error correction. It's
Right. Through
so you
repetition.
said, yeah, you said you read 100 books. You
Hmm.
see more patterns and more error and more opportunities to error correct by that curiosity. If you take a sports star in a narrow sport, that repetition makes them better and better and better at that narrow thing.
Right.
As as their neurons, they're super connectors of their brain, or a biological computer,
Hmm.
get faster and faster, and they see patterns that nobody else sees because they because of that repetition,
Hmm.
that learning rate. Why would a computer be any different?
Right.
That's what it's doing. It just can see the whole picture, and it's error correcting at scale, and it can
Right.
see a lot more. We have to choose very narrowly, the thing, because we run out of time
Right.
or energy to be able to choose the thing we want to do at. And we, by going down that rabbit hole, or the thing that we're looking at, we can't see other things because it takes too much time.
Hmm.
Whereas artificial intelligence just keeps on aggregating more and more data sets, and it can see, so it can see things that we couldn't see.
Hmm. Right. Now, for anybody who's not aware, you talk about the difference between kind of general artificial intelligence and narrow artificial intelligence. This is kind of where there's some debate, right? Because people say that humans have horizontal intelligence, competence across many domains, whereas right now, at least, artificial intelligence is very good at vertical intelligence. So it's much better at one thing than humans can be at one thing. But when you add in all possible domains, that's, humans are, still dominant in that. But it almost doesn't matter, because once you have enough vertical integrations, that
Exactly.
becomes a horizontal over society, right?
That's what we do.
Right.
We pay
Yeah,
for
that's true.
specialists in every industry. That's how it looks. So if artificial intelligence could be having a bunch of different domains, even if it just looked like this, it wouldn't matter for our economy. It
Right.
was like, because that's what we do.
Right. Yeah. And so that's why some of these, especially like you mentioned, like high paying jobs are at risk, things that rely on a high degree of data and analyzing a high degree of data with proper judgment, with large consequences when there are errors, things like judges and lawyers and doctors, things that at least even a vertical integration of AI could perform vastly superior to humans.
Yeah, vastly superior. And so what we question is we don't want that to be true. And so we put
Like
a,
human nature, you're saying
human
okay.
nature. We don't want it, because there must be risk with that system. Like think
Right.
about, eventually cars will drive themselves, but what
Right.
happens when again, a car will make a mistake. It'll be
Yeah.
error. So we look at the consequences of the new system without realizing how much human error contributes to death and destruction and cost right now. And it's mostly in the entire insurance company, insurance is around human error,
Right.
which is most of the. And so we look at the new system wanting it to be perfect before we move to the new system, while failing to realize that the existing system and our own judgment is imperfect.
Right. And in a lot of cases, that gap is widening very quickly. Like
Very
the
quickly.
the rate at which even right now self-driving cars are making errors that cost money and lives is less than human error.
That's why Elon Musk would say, "I'll underwrite insurance," because he
Right.
knows it's way cheaper,
Yeah.
right? And it's a calculation,
Right.
and you run the calculation, and it's not ready yet, but it will be ready. There's nothing in physics stopping it from being ready.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's going to happen. It's a matter. We could say it might be 5 years away still. It
Hmm.
might be two. He thinks it's next year. I don't think it's next year,
Yeah.
but but uh, but it's coming.
Yeah. Which it's that's transportation itself is a perfect example of how technology and artificial intelligence especially brings price deflation, because you talk about how like 5% the utilization rate of all cars right now is about 5% globally. And
Yep.
so if you can increase the utilization out of those resources, that means the amount of metal, the amount of energy, the amount of labor, the amount of cost of error correction and human life and property destruction, all of that, you free up resources. That makes things a lot cheaper, and it brings abundance to an area that was previously costly.
Yeah, and again, why people don't see it is they're trapped in their old world, and they say, so you have to ask yourself, why do I really buy a car?
Mhm.
And and some people might say because I look good or it gets me women or but let's
Right.
say, so I buy a car or two cars or whatever, mostly because I want to use it when I want to use it.
Mhm.
I don't want to wait for a taxi. I want it on demand, and I don't want to. But if you replace that with technology, and you could say I could have a car whenever I want, then I don't need to own two cars or three,
Right.
and I could have the choice of whatever car whenever I want, and it drives me wherever, and I don't have to drive. I don't buy as many cars,
Right.
and that changes utilization rates
Mhm.
significantly.
Right.
It
And
changes the entire economic model of
yes.
how automobile companies make money.
Right. And that's not going to the other side of the spectrum where nobody owns a personal car for fun. That's just, hey, what if we double the utilization rate because some people decide that they don't need to own a car now?
And then what ends up happening? People buy a car and they say, "Hey, when I'm not using it, I'm going to put it back into the fleet,"
Right.
and they can make money on their car. and it
Right.
moves faster and faster. And that density, more and more density of essentially cars in the fleet, gives me what I want anytime, and drives the other side of the coin more and more convenience.
Right. So it's similar to the energy problem, right? The utilization of energy and energy density, kind of from a numbers perspective. Like we've got a lot of our energy is many steps down the line removed from the sun, but oil is still energy that came from the sun at some point. And so the energy density you say that we get from solar is actually there's more there because there's so much waste removed from that process.
Yeah, again, all of our energy that we've consumed now comes from the sun, and we put exploration to dig it out of the ground, burn it, and a whole bunch of inefficiency in that entire. And now, and solar never used to be. It's just hitting this threshold now, where it's becomes more efficient, and it removes a whole bunch of that other infrastructure over time.
Right.
And so that investment in solar, and once it's there, it and so now you can localize things. You can so the grid of a system change, the entire grid of an energy system changes too.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on nuclear?
Not really. I'd like so I know Bill Gates still loves that, or in that I don't think that is that's going to be a path. I think the sunk cost of what that costs, and the risk, kind of the externalities of that,
Mm-hmm.
are so. But I arguably I'm not super deep on nuclear either.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I hadn't heard you talk about it. Um, but with the energy, what you do talk about a lot is that the the abundance of energy translates to the abundance of many other things. Like you make a good example is water. Um, our 2/3 of the world is covered by water, and it's undrinkable. But with RO, you make it accessible, and that's just an energy problem right now.
Yeah, most of these things, or a lot of these things, are energy problems. Because the cost, and they become economic problems because the cost of energy uh, to desalinate water costs
Mm-hmm.
too much, so you don't use it. So there are many of these things are economic problems that are solved by technology hitting different curves that change our way of thinking
Yeah.
about what's next.
Right. Right. So in the future, we've got a bright future ahead of us. At some point, we get, just because of the nature of how technology is progressing, at some point globally, we have a system, a deflationary system, um, that where technology has replaced a lot of labor. But ultimately, like we look at that, like you said, and we don't want that to be true. We're scared of that. We don't think that's a good thing. But ultimately, that's it's not utopian, but it's close because there's a lot of things that require a lot of labor right now that won't in the future. You don't need UBI as a solution because it's free or close to it to have your basic living needs and expenses covered, right? Like that's the long-term future that we have in front of us.
So, and think about that. So why people can't see that on a free market is they think, well, because their comparative set is the current environment of misallocated prices and prices here, and they can't see how good that could look.
Yeah.
And I know you can. But now just carry that forward. And let's imagine an industry that has high margins and a whole bunch of people that don't need to work, because they have everything for free, but they want to.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they would go after?
The high margins.
Yeah. Like, isn't that how it would, isn't
Yeah.
how things
Right.
would work? So wouldn't all of those things be disrupting at a crazy rate to
Right.
bring them down lower in price too?
Yeah.
And so the point of now, the transition between systems, and that's not caused, the transition between systems is not caused, the pain in that is not caused by what will happen no matter what, the technology or anything. The transition between system, the massive pain that's coming, is because of trying to extend and pretend an existing system.
Right.
And the more you do that, the more pain that's going to come in the transition.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so that's what people are, they're so scared, but they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They're so scared of what that looks like, but that they don't know, that it paralyzes them, and they keep on doing what they did. And you keep doing keep doing what you're doing to get the same result over and over again. It's pretty irrational, if
Yeah.
you have, but that's what we're doing.
So understanding that pretty much no matter what, whether we try and postpone it as long as possible or try and deal with the problem right now to transition as smoothly as possible, what would you say are kind of some of the solutions that individuals and governments can do in order to try and move to kind of this new paradigm intentionally rather
Yeah.
than letting it all collapse and burn?
So, um, why I've become an advocate of Bitcoin, is I think it's the best path for humanity to get to the other side. It still won't be easy, but if
Hmm.
governments start to adopt it and work it into the current currencies and peg to it, then it provides a transition from the old system to a new system. And effectively, what would happen is, if there's $400 trillion of entire assets of the world,
Yeah.
eventually will be divided by 21 million Bitcoin.
Right.
Right. So because if you measured your world in Bitcoin today,
Hmm.
what you would see is everything's coming down in price.
Right. Yeah.
Um, it is a currency. Could there be something else that, maybe, but how fast it's growing and how fast of a network effect that it's building, and that ecosystem that's building on itself, I see it as a high likelihood to become a the reserve currency, and then
Hmm.
from there to be potentially be, um, we actually use it as a currency too, or the second layer on Bitcoin as a currency too. And if that and so you can imagine, right now you have this massive wealth inequality, um, and you and there's no way that the world's millionaires could each one of them buy a Bitcoin.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
realize what that would do and change. And yes, some of the early people on Bitcoin would have more, but the bigger thing is, once that's done, the only way you actually retain your Bitcoin or retain power is by giving value to society.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
So there.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
so if you want to be a rogue state, let's use China as example. Right? You want to you want to control your society, then or let's just use, let's say, let's not use a state. Let's use an individual who has 10,000 Bitcoin, and they decide, okay, I'm going to hire myself an army and everything else to be able to have more control. Instead of giving value, they're going to hire themselves an army. They're actually distributing Bitcoin by doing that.
Right. That's
They're
true.
losing power by doing that.
Yeah. Right.
So it levels the playing field, or something like it
Hmm.
levels the playing field, and it forces and it forces, um, a transition to where technology can be provide broad-based abundance.
Right. Yeah, because like you say, there's winners and losers with every system. There's pros and cons with every system, but a deflationary system built on hard money means that the incentives are aligned so that moving ahead equals providing value to society.
Exactly.
Whereas the current system is almost the opposite of that or
Yeah.
going there.
Yeah. Or going there.
Gotcha.
But that's exactly the point.
Okay. All right. Do you have any? I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on gold, since historically that has served as a deflationary monetary system. Any thoughts on how that might play into the future?
I just don't. I think, we used it when we didn't have something like Bitcoin, and it's not pegged to it's not pegged to money anymore. But
Hmm.
there's an irrational belief, I think highly irrational, that it will be pegged to money again.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, that irrational belief has a market cap of $10 trillion on gold.
Right.
And Bitcoin's market cap is about $1 trillion.
Hmm.
And so then it becomes an asymmetric bet. It's actually gold is trying to do the same thing. And the people that believe in gold, it's trying to do the same thing around a forcing function for governments. But you look throughout history, what ended up happening always, because gold had to be centrally stored, is governments confiscated it and changed the rules.
So it tends towards centralization
It
a lot
tends
more than
toward
something like Bitcoin would.
exactly.
Okay.
And so if I just think about an asymmetric bet on which one I would rather have, gold being 10 trillion, and does that I'm not saying, I'm not going to, does it have value, could
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
everything, but an asymmetric bet, the $1 trillion going to infinity, versus the $10 trillion that I just know where I would allocate more of, if I said that part of my capital to,
Hmm.
it would be in Bitcoin.
Well, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate this. I know, everybody who watches is going to have, glean a lot of insights from everything you've said. So I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with me about this. Anybody who wants more, you're very active on Twitter. And so follow you there on Twitter. It's at Jeff D
At
Booth.
Jeff Booth.
Just
Yep.
Jeff Booth. Okay. And I'll link that in the description. And then your book is everywhere you can buy books. I'll link the Amazon link in the description below. It's called The Price of Tomorrow, right?
Yep. You
Okay.
bet.
All right. Well, I'll link both of those for anybody who wants more. Like I said, follow Jeff on Twitter. Fantastic insights, constantly updating there, and read his book. You'll definitely get a lot out of it. So,
This was awesome. Thanks.
hey, well, thank you so much, and you have a good day.
You too.